Concrete and glass. In the modern metropolis, real estate is a blood sport. For some, a marriage certificate is not a declaration of love but a creatively worded lease agreement. Clara learned this the hard way. The illusion of a perfect partnership is a fragile thing, easily shattered when you realize the foundation was built on greed rather than affection. But when you own the foundation itself, the collapse of that illusion doesn't bury you, it buries the architects of your misery. Clara was an only child, a fact she carried lightly, unaware of the target it painted on her back. Her parents were not aristocrats or tech moguls. They were fiercely pragmatic people who, decades ago, smelled the shifting winds of urban development. Back when the city's South District was nothing but rusted warehouses, cracked asphalt, and stray dogs, they pooled their modest, hard-earned savings and bought two identical apartments in a newly erected high-rise. They endured years of tight budgets and cheap diner coffee to secure those deeds. By the time Clara reached her late 20s, those concrete boxes had transformed into highly coveted luxury real estate, a silent testament to her parents' unrelenting foresight. They raised Clara to remain grounded. She wore unbranded clothing, drove a reliable sedan with a dent in the rear bumper, and preferred the quiet satisfaction of a well-brewed cup of tea over flashy weekend getaways. This deep-rooted simplicity is what drew her to Julian. Julian possessed a rugged, bone-deep exhaustion that Clara found incredibly authentic. His shoulders were broad, his hands rough and calloused from years of managing a freight logistics warehouse. He didn't wear tailored suits. He wore faded denim and heavy work boots that left faint scuff marks on the linoleum. To Clara, Julian was the antithesis of the slick, pretentious men she frequently encountered in the city's corporate sectors. She craved that grit. She valued his physical strength and his seemingly straightforward nature. She assumed his quiet demeanor was a sign of quiet confidence. She was terribly wrong. Beneath Julian's stoic exterior brewed a desperate, clawing ambition. Society demanded that a man provide, that he conquer the housing market to prove his worth before taking a wife. Julian had no means to do so. He was drowning in the high cost of living, sharing a cramped, damp rental property with his perpetually dissatisfied mother, Evelyn, and his younger sister, Beatrice. When Julian first brought Clara to that rental for Sunday dinner, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air smelled of stale cooking oil and cheap floral air freshener. Evelyn sat at the head of a wobbly laminate table, her face pulled taut by years of nursing petty grievances. Beatrice, armed with a fresh coat of sticky cherry-red lip gloss, scrolled through her phone, barely offering a greeting. They scrutinized Clara like a bruised peach at the market. When Clara briefly excused herself to the washroom, Evelyn leaned across the table, her voice a sharp hiss. She demanded to know why Julian was wasting his time. An only child meant she would eventually be solely responsible for 4 aging parents, her own and Julian's. Evelyn envisioned decades of medical bills and caretaking duties falling squarely on their shoulders, a heavy anchor dragging her son down. Beatrice chimed in, mocking Clara's unpolished fingernails and modest sweater, but Julian silenced them both with a low, calculated whisper. He explained that Clara's modesty was a smokescreen. He revealed the golden ticket. Clara was the sole heir to 2 premium apartments in the South District. Her parents had already offered one to them as a marital home, free and clear of any mortgage. The temperature in the room shifted instantly. When Clara returned, Evelyn was smiling, a thin, brittle expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. Beatrice suddenly found Clara's stories fascinating. Clara, trusting and naive, mistook this sudden warmth for acceptance. She believed her love for Julian had won them over. 6 months later, they stood at the altar. Clara's parents, brimming with generous optimism, handed over a heavy brass key wrapped in a silk ribbon. It was the key to a sprawling, sun-drenched apartment on the 14th floor, boasting floor-to-ceiling windows and sweeping views of the city skyline. It was a staggering gift, an unparalleled blessing meant to give the young couple a head start in a ruthless economy. Clara envisioned quiet Sunday mornings, the scent of roasting coffee beans and sunlight pooling on the hardwood floors. Instead, she got an invasion. Within 48 hours of returning from their modest honeymoon, the heavy thud of cardboard boxes echoed through the pristine hallway. Julian casually mentioned that his landlord had raised the rent on his mother's unit, and it only made sense for Evelyn and Beatrice to move into their spacious guest rooms. Before Clara could process the logistical nightmare, the apartment was overrun. The quiet sanctuary was immediately shattered. Evelyn claimed the largest guest bedroom and promptly annexed the master bathroom, citing her bad knees requiring the larger soaking tub. The soothing scent of Clara's lavender diffusers was violently replaced by the sharp tang of mothballs and Evelyn's heavy, musky perfume. Beatrice commandeered the living room, leaving trails of discarded clothing, half-empty energy drinks, and tangled phone chargers draped across Clara's carefully chosen mid-century furniture. Worse than the physical clutter was the psychological warfare. The gratitude Clara expected, or at least the basic respect due to a host, was entirely absent. Instead, Evelyn and Beatrice treated her presence as an inconvenience in their new luxury hotel. They weaponized Clara's status as an only child daily. When Clara forgot to pick up a specific brand of oat milk, Evelyn would sigh loudly, muttering to the walls about how only children were so inherently selfish, never having learned the virtue of serving others. When Clara returned exhausted from a long day at work, Beatrice would demand she clean the kitchen, loudly complaining that only children were lazy and spoiled, expecting the world to be handed to them on a silver platter. Clara sought refuge in Julian, expecting her husband to draw a line in the sand. But Julian's true colors bled through the fabric of their marriage. He would sit on the velvet sofa, nursing a cold beer, watching reality television while his mother and sister berated his wife. When Clara confronted him in the hushed privacy of their bedroom, the shadows of the city lights painting bars across his face, he simply shrugged. He told her she was being overly sensitive. He insisted that his family had endured a difficult life of renting and scraping by, and Clara, with her inherited wealth, owed them a little grace. The realization dripped into Clara's mind like freezing water. Julian hadn't married a partner, he had married a landlord. He felt emasculated by his inability to provide, and rather than stepping up, he allowed his family to tear Clara down, punishing her for the very generosity that kept a roof over his head. The physical strength she once admired now looked like profound emotional cowardice. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Clara came home to find a jagged, deep scratch across the surface of her grandmother's antique dining table. Beatrice sat nearby, lazily applying a coat of nail polish, utterly unbothered. Evelyn was in the kitchen, casually tossing Clara's expensive organic groceries into the trash to make room for her bulk-bought frozen dinners. Something inside Clara snapped. It wasn't a loud, explosive break. It was a quiet terminal severing of affection. The blood thrummed in her ears, steady and cool. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She simply walked into the bedroom, packed a small overnight bag, and left the apartment. Over the next few weeks, Clara functioned with the cold precision of a surgeon. She moved into her parents' second apartment. She hired a ruthless, highly recommended attorney whose office smelled of old leather and fresh ink. The divorce papers were drawn up swiftly. Julian, blinded by his own arrogance and his family's constant validation, barely fought the proceedings. He assumed, with the staggering ignorance of an entitled man, that because he and his family occupied the marital home, possession was 9/10 of the law. He believed the courts would force a sale, or better yet, grant him the apartment as part of his alimony, given Clara's apparent wealth. He signed the heavy parchment documents without reading the fine print, his rough hands scribbling away the last remnants of their union. The ink dried, the gavel fell, the marriage was dissolved. The very next morning, Clara walked back into the 14th floor apartment. The air was thick with the smell of burnt toast and Beatrice's cloying hairspray. Clara wore a sharp, tailored blazer she had bought specifically for this occasion. The soft, accommodating girl who wore unbranded sweaters was gone, replaced by a woman forged in the fires of their relentless disrespect. She found Beatrice lounging at the marble kitchen island, scrolling through social media, a half-eaten bagel resting on the bare stone. Evelyn was sitting by the window, adjusting a hideous pair of velvet curtains she had tacked up over the elegant blinds. Julian was at work, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just walked through the front door. Beatrice looked up, a sneer curling her glossy lips. She didn't bother to sit up straight. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Beatrice drawled, her voice dripping with venom. "I heard the papers went through yesterday. You're officially divorced." Clara stopped a few feet from the island, her posture impeccably straight, her expression an impenetrable mask. "I am," she replied, her voice smooth and devoid of any warmth. Beatrice let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "So, when are the movers coming for your junk? Mom wants to turn your old closet into a sewing room, and I need the extra space for my shoes. Since you're not family anymore, it's time for you to pack your bags and get out." Evelyn chuckled from the window, not even bothering to look back. "Leave the espresso machine," Evelyn added over her shoulder. "It's the least you can do after stringing my son along." Silence stretched across the room, Dust motes danced in the shafts of morning light. Clara didn't blink. She reached into her leather tote bag and pulled out a crisp, heavy manila envelope. With a deliberate, measured motion, she slid it across the cool marble of the island. It came to a stop right next to Beatrice's bagel. "I think there has been a profound misunderstanding regarding the nature of this property," Clara said, her voice dropping an octave, ringing with absolute authority. Beatrice frowned, her eyes darting from Clara's face to the envelope. She reached out, her manicured nails catching the flap, and pulled out the documents. They were official city records, stamped and notarized. "What is this?" Beatrice muttered, her bravado faltering slightly. "That is the deed to this apartment," Clara stated, enunciating every syllable. "You will notice there is only one name on it, mine. This apartment was never marital property. It was a premarital asset, gifted solely to me by my parents, held in a trust that Julian never had access to. He didn't read the divorce decree. He didn't realize he relinquished all claims to a property he never owned in the first place." Evelyn turned away from the window, the hideous velvet curtain slipping from her grasp. Her face drained of color, the deep wrinkles around her mouth suddenly stark and pronounced. Clara took a step closer to the island, leaning in, forcing Beatrice to shrink back. "I am not moving out, you are. Behind that deed is a formal eviction notice. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your clothes, your cheap perfume, and your miserable attitudes and vacate my property. If you leave so much as a scuff mark on these hardwood floors, I will drag you through civil court until you are garnished for the rest of your natural lives." Beatrice's mouth opened and closed, resembling a fish pulled onto dry land. You can't do this. Where are we supposed to go? Rents have doubled." "I suggest you ask your brother," Clara whispered, a terrifyingly serene smile touching the corners of her lips. "He is the man of the house, after all. He should have no problem providing." Clara turned on her heel, her footsteps echoing sharply against the floorboards, leaving the two women suffocating in the sudden, crushing vacuum of their ruined reality. In the end, Julian and his family learned a devastating lesson about the cost of ingratitude. They had been handed a life of comfort, a sanctuary protected from the vicious grind of the city, delivered by a woman whose only initial flaw was loving a man who didn't deserve her. They mistook her kindness for weakness, her simplicity for stupidity. They were forced to scramble back into the unforgiving rental market, cramming into an apartment half the size and twice the price of their original home. Julian's pride was entirely dismantled, his family constantly bickering, crushed under the weight of the financial burden he had tried so deceitfully to escape. Meanwhile, Clara hired a professional cleaning crew to scrub every inch of the 14th floor apartment. She threw open the floor-to-ceiling windows, letting the brisk city wind sweep away the lingering scent of mothballs and hairspray. She stood on her balcony, sipping a hot cup of tea, looking out over the sprawling metropolis. She had lost a husband, but she had gained an impenetrable sense of self-worth. A truly good partner brings immeasurable value to a relationship, not just in assets but in loyalty, grace, and shared burdens. When you fail to appreciate that, when you view love through the distorted lens of entitlement and materialism, you inevitably lose everything. True wealth isn't just about owning the concrete beneath your feet. It's about having the character to stand tall upon it. If Clara's ruthless, brilliant realization resonated with you, if you believe that greed always brings its own ruin, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below telling us how you would have handled these entitled in-laws. And join our community for more stories where karma doesn't just knock, it breaks down the door. Until next time, know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own life.